Hello, friends. We are back with episode 117 of the Our Weekly Highlights podcast. I am personally fresh from quite an adventure out in the Great Smoky Mountains, so I'm unwinding a bit, but it's great to be back in the swing of things. And to help me do that, of course, is my great co-host, Mike Thomas. Mike, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing well. Not quite as traveled as you lately, but looking forward to the warm weather this summer, getting me out there a little bit more. And as you know, we have some travel to do together later this year.
You bet. You bet. Luckily, the travel I'll do to the conference is much less than what I just did. So it'll be a 3 hour drive for me. You'll have a short flight. But yeah, we are very much looking forward to Chicago in September for the Posit Conference. And certainly, well, while we're on that subject, it's not too late to register for our Shiny in Production workshop. So if you want more info on that, just head you can just search for Deposit Conf 2023. You'll find the registration right there, and we'd be happy to have you.
Shameless plug.
That's what we do here. But we don't just plug our stuff, of course. We're plugging our weekly because our weekly is the reason we're here. And our issue this week was curated by John Calder, another fantastic release. And as always, he had tremendous help from our weekly team members and contributors like you all around the world. And we're going to get really geeky with this one because our first highlight is a GitHub gist, but it's got a lot packed in it. And it is from a good friend of ours who's been very active in the Shiny in our community, Dr. Peter Salimos, I was very fortunate to have join me in the recent ShinyConf Shiny Dev Series live recording, which hopefully we'll have the recording out very soon. But he was amazing with this post, which talks about how we can do web API calls in R, which we have talked a lot about the Plumber package for good reason. It is becoming a huge presence in the capabilities for R to have, in essence, equal footing of all these other web technologies to put very sophisticated or simple or maybe somewhere in between processes for use as a web API. But Plummer was not the first to do this, folks. In fact, this just is a great stroll down memory lane for me because there is a lot. In fact, Peter has 10 examples of producing web APIs from R, all with different frameworks. And the first one that caught my eye, this isn't quite in chronological order of the gist, but as I scroll through this, there is a package called rserve. This is authored by Simon Urbanek, who, if that name sounds familiar, is a member of the R core team. So there's some great cachet right there. He released rserve, get this, 2006. That is, if my math is correct, 17 years ago, R had this capability. Can you believe it? It's just crazy, isn't it? So I remember experimenting a little bit of rserve back in my grad school days when we were trying to put like a simple like mix of PHP, MySQL, and a little bit of R analysis for some local parks to serve up their data and give them some insights. And I admit I was way over my head. I didn't know how any of this stuff works, but it's great to see just if knowing what I know now, it doesn't seem too bad. And then there are others that struck my fancy a bit. Rook is another package that was released in 2011. It's actually been forked more recently. It was originally offered by Jeffrey Horner, and it is based on the use of reference classes, or RC. You don't hear about this as much as the R6 and S4 paradigms, but if you ever want to know how you could do web APIs with this, Rook is an interesting thing to explore as well. And then I caught OpenCPU. This is authored by Jeroen Ooms, who we just talked about a few weeks ago as the architect behind the R Universe infrastructure. So I always thought to myself, OpenCPU was really kind of ahead of its time. It can do all sorts of things from a web API standpoint. I think that may have been a precursor to his Adventures of Our Universe. Of course, don't quote me on that. Jerome, if you ever want to write back to us, let us know. But I think you definitely got some inspiration from your Adventures from OpenCPU because it is amazingly intricate and very innovative. And then, of course, there are some other nice ones here too, such as Thomas Lynn Peterson's exploration in web APIs with the Fiery package. That's an awesome name, Fiery. I love it. And right off the bat, Thomas was quick to say that this is different than Shiny. It is very general. You have to do more of the heavy lifting, but with that, you get more flexibility, in his opinion. So it is an interesting take on how you could use Fiery from both a Shiny context, but also in this context, just a simple web API. You could do either one. It's up to you to stitch it all together. And so the whole gist is basically the same hello world type example, but again, coded in 10 different packages. And then in the end, you get to see a little comment in the gist that talks about the release dates of each of these packages. And that's where I saw that, as if I didn't feel old enough, like I said, with RServe being out in 2006, all the way to more recently, where we've seen adventures from John Kuhn with the Ambiorix package, which I believe has been archived actually, but it was an adventure nonetheless. So a great timeline there at the end, and he even has a nice little ggplot that shows the download stats so you can run in your R console as well if you want to get some download numbers historically of what's been happening here. But really awesome. I'd say just run with it, have a nice comparison to see where we've gone, where we've come as a community in this technology. And I really enjoyed seeing all the technical bits here and comparing and contrasting how you can do web APIs in R with many of these packages.
Well, you covered quite a bit of it, and yeah, I couldn't agree more. And there are some big names behind these different API framework R packages, as you had mentioned. And I thought it was really cool that Peter took the time to sort of put this all together. Because again, it's, I think, a great demonstration of just all the different options that we have and different ways of sort of doing the same thing, right? And one might be a little bit more tailored to your use case than another, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. So it's nice to have the different options out in front of us, and for sure it includes some of maybe the better known R packages such as Plumber and HTTP UV that I'd seen before, but so many others that I did not know about, including Beaker, Rook, and OpenCPU, as you mentioned, RServe, REST RServe as well, which maybe is a more recent incarnation of RServe. So really interesting. And you know, APIs at a higher level are just really a phenomenal way to wrap your model's logic into something that folks across your organization can use from their other applications that don't need to know anything about R. And some people have strong opinions against microservices, but I am not one of them. And it doesn't even have to be a model, right? It can be any R logic that you can wrap up into an API to allow others to leverage. So again, it's just really nice to be able to see all these different options in front of us and know that there are so many different ways to stand up an API from R, and not everything needs to be deployed with Python.
Oh, hot take number one of many, perhaps. I don't know, but no, I've lived that life as well in the recent years, where sometimes I'll do a simple API in front of a complicated database, and that way the user doesn't have to care about database credentials. I take care of all that from the back end. They just have to call a little GET request. I'm able to get the info they need and protect the other stuff, and it just that the art is stitching it all together. I mean, I think separating business logic into fit for purpose things, it's kind of like the Linux philosophy. One package that does one thing and does it well, you could do have microservices that each do one thing and do it well. But the again, the art is how do you orchestrate it together where it's easy for your users of your overall app to get in line with it and be able to use it effectively, but also as you as a developer or the team of developers to be able to maintain that and to be able to develop them in sync. You know, those are separate issues, of course, but you can have as much flexibility as you want with these frameworks, and it's very important in my day to day job right now.
Yes, and shout out to actually a project that I worked on with Peter, which was a Shiny app that included the ability to download, I think, TIFF files or raster images or something like that from within the Shiny app, which those links in the app called out an API that he had developed to sort of do exactly that, be able to query a database essentially and download just the data that you wanted.
Oh yeah, I'm a little jealous. I'd love to be able to collaborate with Peter on a project someday. That sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I guess I'm kind of curious now that I got to figure out what framework he used for standing up that API. Which of these 10?
Yeah, you got 10 possibilities to choose from, I guess. You're guessing. Now you mentioned, Mike, trying to wrestle some, data files maybe from a remote source or another location. Well, that's a good transition to our last highlight of today, which is, of course, you've got your data. They could be either locally stored or on a web server somewhere or somewhere in between. What are some interesting and hopefully easier ways for you to get these into R for your post processing so that you can actually get to your data analysis? Our next highlight is a blog post authored by Kieran Healy, who is a professor of sociology at Duke University, all about reading, in this case, remote data files or local data files. In this case, we're talking about some congressional type data. But he starts with case one, which is you have a bunch of CSV files. For whatever reason, they're stored in separate files. Well, this might be the easiest case to deal with because in functions from the readr package, like read underscore CSV, note that's different than the base R, read.csv, you can have a vector of files to read from. Well, geez, all you have to do then is make sure you can get the path to your files. Maybe it's a directory somewhere. Feed it into read underscore CSV. Bob's your uncle, as they say, and you've got it. You've got all the data tidied up and bundled together. Now, this is where we take a turn. We're about to drive into another curve here, Mike. It's time for Excel. You have your seatbelts on.
Yeah, I might have to put 2 on.
Yeah, me too. This is giving me flashbacks to my road trip recently. We were driving up this mountain area and then we had high winds, and I'm like, oh, was our car going to tip over? Well, Excel sometimes makes you feel that way too because you never know what you're going to get with this. Unfortunately, with Excel, not everything is as easy as it was with the CSV version because yes, there are packages to read Excel files into R. Well, yeah, you almost have to at this point. So one way or another, you have to deal with Excel. Well, read underscore XLSX from the read Excel package, unfortunately, does not bind multiple files together at once. So what can you do when you still have a directory of Excel files stored somewhere and you want to minimize the amount of times you call read underscore XOSX? Well, that's where our friend from the per package comes
I was gonna
through.
say.
Per with map underscore DFR. That is the easiest way to feed in that paths of file names and then bind them all together by row. Now that's all local. This was talking, the big picture here is about what happens when they're remote, right? Well, in some websites, even today, you might have a website that looks just like an index of links. This is actually called a directory listing, much like you might do on your computer, but in a web form. And so the example goes to having a whole bunch of Excel files that are stored on a FTP front end site from the CDC. Now, how can you get these? Well, this is where you have to get a little creative sometimes because you notice that all these links are going to have a pattern to it. They're going to have the same base address, but they might change the file name prefix, but then they might have the same suffix. One of the ways that Kieran tackles this issue is you could actually scrape this web page using rvest to grab all the hyperlinks, which are, of course, the A tag in web lingo, and then grab the source of each of those links and then use that and do a little massaging to get the file names, get the output like extension. And then now you've got that remote set of file names. Now, had these been CSVs, you'd be done because you could just read remote files directly with read underscore CSV. It doesn't care if it's local or remote as long as you get the path right. But this is where it gets tricky. With Excel, you can't quite do that easily. So Kieran takes a novel trick, which admittedly I use in a production setting for a much different context, is you have to temporarily download that Excel file to a temp area somewhere. And then make sure that the file name, no matter what cryptic thing it puts in front of it, has the right extension at the end. That's important because Read Excel will not be happy with you if it's not an XLSX or XLS file. So once he does that little magic, again, in a nice little utility function that he calls get underscore life table, he's able to simply then call Read Excel's Read XLSX on that temp file and import it in. These are tricks that those of us who have been in the trenches will have to do at some point. But luckily, the example is very easy to follow in this blog post. It's very well narrated, all the different steps and why Kieran chose the frameworks he did. But once you've got it, then you've got your tidy data once again. You're ready to do some analysis. But yes, Excel strikes again. But hey, it doesn't have to be too painful. You don't have to feel like you're driving through a 2,000 high mountain to get through it. This blog post is a great way to see just what's capable of when your files are not exactly stored in a convenient place. So, Mike, what did you think about this adventure here?
Yeah, I think it's a great demonstration about, as data scientists, we have to employ a few different tools, usually, right, to get to the end, of what we need to accomplish here. And, that's very well demonstrated in this blog post with the use of RVest to try to scrape those links, the use of curl to create a connection to the FTP site to retrieve the file names and sort of control what Kieran gets back. I was going to say, leave it to the life sciences industry not to provide an API to their data, but instead an FTP with a bunch of Excel files. Am I right, Eric?
Oh, yeah, you couldn't have said it better. Oof, that hurts.
Sorry, I'm just kidding. No, but it's really beautifully concise code that Kieran puts together, and that helper function, that get underscore life table, is really nice. There's assignment inside of a function, which is something that you don't see out in the wild too often, but I can definitely see what he's going after there, employing the HTTR package, temp files as well, like you said, to download this data temporarily, then read it into a data frame with read underscore XLSX from the read Excel package. And then, just like you said, at the very end, what sound does a cat make? We are employing per, this one liner, essentially, map data frame across that get life table function that he custom created. And it couldn't be easier at the end to just concatenate all that data together into a single table. So really well articulated blog post, and I think it's a use case probably that all of us have encountered at one time or another. So this is going to be a great reference for me to have in my back pocket for the next time that I inevitably run into a bunch of Excel files.
Yeah, you can't avoid it. It's like having clouds in the sky. They're going to happen someday. but
Exactly.
I what I really like though is that the post is kind of like if you encounter this situation, you start to see a pattern of how things are similar. In this case, the links, right? If you see that they're similar, stop yourself from being like, okay, I'll just copy paste. Just put the brakes on for a second because you never know. In this case, it would have been like 50 or so of these copy pastes, or there was a file for each state. You could just have one typo somewhere and then it's all going to go crashing down. So if this is part of a process that you want to automate and hopefully be hands off once you initially develop it, you want to automate as much as you possibly can and avoid the manual effort. I don't think you need to hear us tell you that twice, but take it from someone who's been down that trap of trying to get something done quickly and end up hurting myself a bit in the foot, so to speak, because I had one error and one typo and it was so difficult to track down. So if you can scrape or find some logic to piece the paths together, like Kieran does here, you're going to be much better off. So again, just take it from somebody who's been through it the hard way.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And one note, just because I think I got burned by this in the past recently. If you absolutely need to download a file first before you read it into a data frame, please use the temp file function from BaseR. Don't create a new directory in whatever working directory your user is going to be working in at that point in time. That's all.
Oh, you're not the only one who's been down that trap before. I had probably one of my most well-known internal packages was doing that very thing when I didn't know any better. But that's been that's been changed since because
Yes.
you live
Human
and
evolved.
learn.
Yes.
There's a lot of learning to be had, folks, and the rest of the issue of our weekly this week. And John, like I said, has done a tremendous job. So we'll take a little few minutes here to call out some additional finds. And for me, it's more of a call to action, you might say. Oscar Barufa, if that name sounds familiar, he is the one who's authored the Big Book of R site, which has been very much featured in previous episodes and a wonderful resource for people to get their learning on across different subjects. Well, he's looking for community input on a possible proposal that he wants to send to the R consortium, which, if it's accepted, could be a sanctioned project with funding for some additional development to basically supercharge much of the infrastructure and overall quality of the Big Book of R. He's got a pretty hefty wish list, but if this gets selected, he would like to use some community input that he gets in this call to action as part of his proposal. So we'll have a link in the show notes where if you want to get in touch and send your feedback to Oscar, he would greatly appreciate it. But I did have a look at some of the things he's asking for to work on in this R consortium proposal. There are very important things, in my opinion, like having a robust database structure of the content that he could do a lot more with. And also, he wants to put it into Quarto. Why not, right? Yeah, that's a big ticket item. And then he has a big wish list here, but I think the last item might be the one I most got my attention on is that each book, when you click on that, imagine if you're able to get its table of contents right in the Big Book of R resource. That could be a huge win for usability and user experience, but that's going to take some infrastructure enhancements and engineering development to make happen. So, I wish Oscar the best of luck. Hopefully, this little plug here will get some more eyes on this with some more community input. But yeah, we look forward to seeing hopefully some great improvements to the Big Book of R in the near future.
I feel like there may potentially could be some overlap between what's happened in the R universe from a technological standpoint in terms of, I don't know, doing a great job at representing a ton of information, as well as the Big Book of R, kind of from a high level, is sort of doing the same thing, right? Trying to do a great job at encapsulating a ton of content and resources. So I that I think we got some steam under our belt on this topic from what's gone on in the R universe, and hopefully Oscar can get some of those tailwinds as well for this project.
Very cool. Yep. Well, Mike, what did you find this week?
I found two that I wanted to call out. One highlight is something that I think is talked about quite often, and I think folks have quite varying opinions on it as well from time to time. It's balancing classes in classification problems. It's a blog by Matt Kay. And sort of the subtitle is Why That's Generally a Bad Idea. So he looks at it from a few different use cases, using all of your favorite tidyverse packages as well to sort of explore differences in prediction and accuracy, as well as different resampling approaches like SMOTE, for balancing and rebalancing training data, and to take a look at sort of how that impacts the actual accuracy of the predictions at the end of the day. And some really great discussion as well in this blog post about when maybe it makes sense to rebalance and when it might not make sense to rebalance. So that was one highlight that I found. And then a second one is an interview with Woo Jun Jung, who is the founder of the R Korea group. And he was interviewed by the R Consortium to discuss his efforts on using R in finance and accounting. in Korea. And I feel like, we do hear a lot about life sciences and other sciences where R is used heavily in, and finance and accounting maybe don't get quite as much recognition. And this could be biased a little bit on my end because I do a lot of work in that field. But I thought it was nice to see an interview in Woo Junjung's perspective on how R is being leveraged currently and hopefully in the future as well, in this particular industry.
Yeah, that's something I'm going to be looking at as well. I've greatly admired many of the prominent members in the finance community. And in fact, one little fun fact, I believe the author, or at least one of the main authors of the VS Code R extension, Kun Ren, is heavily involved in finance as well. So yeah, I've been greatly admire a lot of their work. So I'll be reading that interview after I record this when I get some downtime again. Very, very nice. And what else is nice? Well, again, the rest of the issue, and of course, we'll have links to everything we talked about in the show notes. And we always love hearing from you. If you want to get in touch with us on the podcast itself, we have a little contact page directly linked in the show notes. And as well, if you have one of those fancy new modern podcast apps like Fountain or Podverse, you could send us a little boostergram inside the app itself to give us a little bit of nice message right in your podcast player. So very easy to connect with a service called Alby, and I have links to how you can do all that in the show notes as well. And of course, our weekly loves your contributions. We are just a pull request away from our markdown draft of the current issue. If you find a great link to a package, a great blog post, an interesting find, a great community resource, we love to hear about it. So go to artweekly.org. You're going to see a link to the draft right there and a way to quickly send a pull request. We'd love to hear what you have to share with us on the art community. And you can also get in touch with us directly. I am still sporadically on Twitter with @theRcast, but I am also on Mastodon with @ourpodcast at podcastindex.social, causing all sorts of mischief over there. Mike, where can people find you?
Yes, likewise. I find myself using Twitter less and less these days. The content just seems to be less and less data science in terms of what I'm seeing on my timeline for whatever reason. So I am trying to be more active on Mastodon, and you can find me over there at Mike_Thomas at Fosstodon.org.
And by the way, we do want to give a great shout out to James Wade, who very much surprised us last night as we record this with an enhancement to his GPT tools package that we just talked about recently, where apparently now we can transcribe our very own podcast with GPT tools. Can you believe that?
You don't have to listen to us anymore.
Now, wait a minute. Please still download our episodes. But yes, I may have to put this in my production pipeline. This is awesome stuff. So that space is evolving quite rapidly. So he's got links to that and well as other examples that have become in GPT tools. So that's worth checking out as well.
Yes, thank you, James.
Yeah, thanks for the shout out. We appreciate it, and it's great to see the innovations in this space. Well, that's gonna wrap up episode 117. My little one is frantically pulling my chair away, so that means I gotta go. But we'll be back with episode 118 of our weekly highlights next week.